Hey, how's it going? So I picked National Airlines Flight 27. National Airlines was a airline from 1934 to 1980, and they did coast-to-coast flights from, the East Coast to the West Coast. So Flight 27 was on November 3rd, 1973, and it was a McDonnell Douglas DC-10-10. Flight 27 was on what started in Miami, and it was on its way to San Francisco. And at 39,000 feet, around 4 o'clock, their engine number 3 experienced a catastrophic engine failure. There was 116 passengers on board and 12 crew members. When the number 3 engine failed, it what was going on was the I'm sorry. So what happened was, prior to the engine number 3 failure, the pilot and the flight engineer were experimenting with the relationship between the engine's fan speed, its N1 speed, and signals with the automatic flight control system. They were curious to see, how the system worked. And So the pilot, he selected the airspeed with the autopilot at 257 knots, and the flight engineer pulled the circuit breakers for the N1 tachometers for the engine for engines 1, 2, and 3. Target airspeed reduced by 5 knots, and when the throttles retarded, the pilot disengaged auto throttle. The crew then heard an explosion, which was the engine number 3, and then when the engine exploded, the parts of the number 3 engine hit the number 1 engine and also struck the fuselage, which caused a big hole in the airplane window. And then the only fatality was the guy sitting in that seat got sucked out. The cause of the number 3 engine failure was the first stage of the compressors, or the fans or whatever, were hitting the outer casing of the engine, causing a vibration, and this vibration was so strong that it just caused catastrophic failure. After the explosion, the pilot made a emergency descent and was able to land safely at Albuquerque Airport. During their emergency descent, though, only half of the oxygen masks fell from the roof of the cabin, and passengers were panicking, and there was an insufficient amount of oxygen, which caused an AD that required sufficient oxygen and more like the crew would get their own source of oxygen from the rest of the passengers, and there would be an AD for all the masks to fall when there is an emergency. There wasn't an AD for the engine, but there was a service bulletin to increase the fan blade tip and case clearance, between the two. Prior to the flight, it was on a DC-10 is a General Electric CF6 engine. And on November 15th, 1972, American Airlines experienced a CF6 engine failure during a test cell operation. The bell mouth and exhaust cone separated, and all fan blades were destroyed. The failure investigation focused on the cause of the failure as being the improper installation of the bell mouth to the engine, specifically the installation of the bolts by American Airlines. It was eventually determined that the bell mouth the bolts had been properly torqued, and the failure had been a result of the interactive mode. And then on January 12th, 1973, GE experienced a similar failure of a CF6 engine, and during the test cell operation, the failure was the same thing that happened on the National Airlines flight. The fan rotor and casing were rubbing together, and it caused severe damage to the test cell even. At that time, though, the failures were not fully understood, and they didn't think the risk would repeat itself to, be a danger to revenue in commercial engines. I'm sorry, for commercial use, I mean. After all said and done, what National Airlines did was they repaired the airplane and later sold it to Pan Am.